YouTube first. Yeah, I don't need to view no camera button. Okay, thank you for coming, everyone. I'm Keisuke Suzuki in Chain, and today's Chain seminar is by Manuel Baltieri. He just finished Chain Winter School last week, and he generously also provided another seminar talk at Chain. And Manuel and I met in Sussex University when he's doing a PhD, and after finishing PhD on active inference and control theory, he moved to Japan, working in the Riken Brain Science Institute. And now currently he's working in Araya, which is also the partner of Chain. And today he's going to talk about Markov blanket, or what Manuel said, Friston's blanket, and inference with and within the model. Please, stage yours, Manuel.
Thank you, Keisuke, for the nice introduction. First question, can everyone hear me from the back? Yeah, loud and clear, great. Second question, how many people from, say, humanities or, yeah, can we just, yeah. Okay, good. How many people not from humanities? Oh, amazing. And as I was telling, like, some people before I came, I had the pleasure to come 3 years ago, and I had a talk for control engineers and an audience of philosophers. And today I have a talk for philosophers and an audience of, well, not philosophers. I mean, there are clearly some philosophers, but yeah, so yeah, be patient with me. I'll try to cover the material. There's no, I mean, as far as I can tell, there's no whiteboard over which I can do equations and stuff. But yeah, I mean, I hope you can anyway get something useful out of this. Okay, so last question, at least for now. Has anyone ever heard of something called free energy principle in neuroscience and biology? Yeah, okay, good. If you haven't, don't worry, I'll try and cover this thing, but that's kind of like the starting point for why we needed this talk, and well, why we needed the paper behind this talk. So okay, briefly, okay, is this working now? No, it stopped working. Amazing. Very brief outline. So I will try and give a general overview of the thing I just mentioned. So this free energy principle in neuroscience and biology. I will not go too much into details because, well, A, I didn't prepare equations for the talk, and B, it is anyway a mess, and me trying to interpret their mess is probably not going to make everyone happy anyway. Then I will mention this particular thing, this Markov blankets thing, which are just a statistics concept, and that these people are kind of using for other purposes. And I will make a distinction between different kinds of applications of this statistical construct. And I will try then to highlight some of the issues that we find in the literature. We reviewed, say, hundreds of papers that talk about this kind of stuff. And then we wrote basically a very long review where we got some replies, some commentaries about our, say, overview of the literature. In the end, I will sketch, like, depending on how much time left we have, some solutions that I believe are in place for this particular set of issues that we found. And some of them are technical. I do have some slides in there which are a bit more technical, but yeah, without, again, like, a very clear and defined, say, timeline for that. I will just leave it, for the end, depending on how much time I have left. Okay, so this thing, yes, whatever. Oh, did everything just stop working? Okay, no, this is working. Good. This is the paper. Just this are us, like the authors. Was, I don't know, 40, 50 pages of papers. We got 35 people replying to this, and then we just wrote a reply to that. For those over whom like this meme is not lost, the literature on this active inference free energy principle is a mess. There's around 200 papers a year that come out mentioning that they are solving something. The point is that the claims are a bit vague, and at times the maths is just plain wrong. When it's not wrong, it's hidden in the code. And then if you look at the code, well, the code does not really reflect what some of the authors mean. And then if you ask these authors, they are, well, why don't you ask the other author? Okay, well, okay, can you just tell me what you're trying to say? So this is just to highlight that there's a lot of confusion. And, you know, while I can highlight some of it here, yeah, it is not by any means of the imagination like something easy to completely stress in a single talk. So I will be covering basically some of the foundational maths claims behind this kind of thing, and then what their repercussions are. Okay, so roughly speaking, what is this free energy principle? Well, it's a theory, a framework, a principle, whatever it is that it's called nowadays, that tries to tell us how we can identify a system from its environment in very general, say, settings. So, you know, for those of you that were there, for example, at Artemis talk earlier, you know, in physics, you just say, well, there's a system, and then, well, in thermodynamics at least, there's a system, and then there's usually a heat bath if you're doing equilibrium thermodynamics, and then you want to study the system as opposed to the heat bath. The heat bath acts as the environment. Now the question is, well, if I just gave you the universe, would you be able to split the universe into systems and heat baths? So the question now is reversed. We don't assume that, they say. We are trying to understand how we can create this split and what good criteria are to understand when a system is of interest. So what I call a system, they call a thing, but it is basically the same intuition. Then they use this idea of Markov blankets, which I will briefly mention, comes from statistics, and they say, well, the magic is in the use of this Markov blankets. This is the core, I guess, like, you know, construct like behind this, well, I would say like the high road story behind this free energy principle. They say we are going to be able to tell you how to split the universe into systems of interest and their environments. This literature is also mixed with something called active inference, in case you heard that name before. And sometimes it's called free energy principles, sometimes it's called active inference, sometimes it's called something else. My point here is that, you know, there's a difference between the, say, first principles approach that we try to, say, overview, and where they say, well, we're going to be able to split systems and environments, and this active inference thing, which is basically an alternative way to do reinforcement learning. So we have a cost function, and then we minimize this cost function to achieve a certain goal. The things are a bit different in the sense that the cost function is different. The way we minimize it is a bit different. But here, there's no claim about, you know, creating a partition between system and environment, agent and environment. They are, you know, defined a priori, and then we try to study how one of the systems actually does something interesting, if it ever does. Again, to stress the thing, in the literature, this stuff is all mixed. I'm trying to be very, very clear. I believe these two are two different lines of research, and I will just be focusing on the first one. So first principles attempt to define what it means to be an agent, what it means to be a system. This could work in, you know, in robotics, and that would be fine. I would be happy. I would be extremely happy if this worked in practice, but it's not what I'm going to be talking about. Anyway, so this is where, you know, having say an audience with mixed mathematicians is a bit scary now, because this is where I'm going to start using some math stuff, but without equations. So if somebody asks me to write equations, well, this will take some time probably. So these people say, okay, we're going to take a random dynamical system, and we are going to say this system is the whole thing we are interested in. This is what we want to be able to partition. We are going to look now at the unique steady state distribution of this random dynamical system. So we need to assume that there is one and that is unique. And, this also connects for those of you that were at Artemis talk at some of the things that Artemis was mentioning. Then this is also connected to some of the things that Artemis was mentioning. Now we are going to look at how the steady state, how we can describe the steady state distribution of this random dynamical system. And specifically, we're going to look at how we can decompose different ways in which fluxes of this random dynamical system are actually acting at steady state. So if it's an equilibrium steady state, they will just go towards an equilibrium and die out there. If there's some non-equilibrium component, then we will have a non-zero flux. And that's something that we are interested in because, well, we want to say that biological systems are out of equilibrium. So that's why we want to be able to look at these two things independently to kind of, differentiate biological systems, cool, from non-biological systems, not as cool. Of course, it's not the full story because we have plenty of, non-biological systems that actually are out of equilibrium. Circuits in my computer are, typhoons are, plenty of stuff is, but, it's a beginning. Okay, now that we have, say, this partition, which is cool for some reasons, we are also going to look at how the variables, at steady state. So now we are assuming that we have perhaps like some ensemble of particles, and we're just going to look at how, this ensemble of particles is evolving towards a steady state. And then when it is a steady state, we're going to try and partition this ensemble of particles. And we're going to try and partition it in fundamentally 3 different partitions. Something we're going to call internal states, and that's the system we want. Something we're going to call external states, and that's the environment. And then something that they call a blanket states, set of blanket states, which is the thing that divides the system from the environment. Now, this doesn't come for free, but that's the main point of this talk, so I will not be spending too much time on it right now. There's then like some extra assumption about the fact that you need some specific way to connect the partitioning that you do at steady state with the possible partition of the entire random dynamical system away from steady state. And this is a huge assumption. It's a bit like, swept under the rug. I will be mentioning something, but not too much because this is still a big, big issue. Then they also need to assume that there is some invertible map between parameters of the internal states and say variables that parameterize internal states and variables that parameterize the external states. And this map is invertible. Again, big assumption. Basically some sort of, if you're familiar with the idea of synchronization manifold, it's something along those lines. Then in the end, we are going to be able to say that these internal states are doing approximate Bayesian inference on the external states. That's the claim that these people are making. It's a very dense slide. I don't expect you all to follow all steps, especially because I didn't spend a long time on them. And they require, say, like coming from a lot of different angles, and probably my explanation could be better in some places. But I wanted to flesh out, this is what I'm going to be focusing on. Okay, if you want to know what I think the free energy principle is, at least up to 2021, this is it for me. There's 2 more years of papers involved. As far as I check them, they still say the same thing with just more, exotic maths, but there's nothing really new going on. Okay, as I mentioned, I'm going to be focusing on that point. That's why I didn't stop too long, partially on the next one, but yeah, main point number 4. As I said, more recent developments, amazing. Yeah, maybe we don't need a unique steady state distribution, maybe we just need some stationary distribution. It doesn't matter if it's unique. Maybe we can do this with some other assumptions. Yeah, amazing. But yeah, I think the core list of assumptions is still pretty much the same. Some basics, really, really basics. But at least I need something like to hang on, like, during this talk, when I talk about, please.
Can you go back to the previous slide?
Yes. Oops, that's not how you go back with this thing. Yes.
So for I'm wondering if you're going to talk about the non-stationary density over paths thing.
So I don't know. I've been told for years that they have a way to do with the assumption of stationarity. I don't see it. I think that's the easy way to say I don't see it, because the only way that they talk about this is just transitions between non-stationary states. And they do say like this, say the traditional they go about it like the traditional way to do thermodynamics about it. So you either assume like instantaneous transitions or infinitely slow ones, so that it's always stationary anyway. And that's not very satisfactory. They claim that, yeah, I mean, in this paper, this is coming from one of their papers, they try to use maximum caliber principle to actually bring out something more interesting, say, on trajectories rather than steady state distributions. But, as far as I can tell from their paper, like, this is coming from one of their preprints, the interesting results, the only interesting results, so this approximate Bayesian inference lemma that they describe does not work on paths. So, the only reason I ever cared about this was the fact that they could tell me whether a system is doing inference on another one and why. And it doesn't work on, non-stationary systems. That's what they tell me in this paper. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know where they are going with this, but yeah, I don't find this particularly amazing yet. They might have some solution, but yeah, not last time I checked. But yeah, I just wanted to give justice. I'm not saying these people are not thinking about all of these different issues. Yeah, does that make sense? Yeah, cool. As I said, some very basic stuff. I want to be able to talk about probabilities, and I want to be able to talk about joint probabilities. So when I have two variables, I want to be able to say what a joint between two variables is. I want to be able to talk about conditional probabilities. So one variable influenced by another variable. And then marginal independence, so no connection between variables, and conditional independence. So the fact that one variable could be, between two other variables, and making, in this case, y and x conditionally independent on z. I mentioned this as an example. There are other ways to look at it. There are basically there are other two cases that are not very important here, but this is the language that I'm going to use for the rest of the talk. So I thought it would be nice for us all to agree on this kind of terminology. Okay, next, the main thing about this talk was this Markov blanket thing that I mentioned comes from statistics. It is really just the variable that makes at least two other variables conditionally independent. So if I say that y is conditionally independent on x, or x is conditionally independent on y, given z, that z is the Markov blanket in statistics. So that's it. There's nothing else. There's no magic. It's a really simple definition. Might find at least this slightly more interesting if we start adding more variables, and then we say, okay, now it's a set of variables. And they might have, much more complicated structure than what I'm showing here. But the point is not to show how complicated it is. It is just to show that it's a bunch of, variables in some kind of Bayesian network, if we are using Bayesian networks to represent this kind of scenario. This is it. So what's the problem with it? Well, the problem is, this was defined by by PER for, for the purpose of doing inference on, Bayesian networks and other kinds of graphical languages. In the 80s, it's in one of these books. That's great. You can do the inference with this. It allows you to simplify the problem by saying, well, you just need to look at the Markov blanket of a variable to understand how the state of this variable is actually evolving. You don't need to look at the entire network. All of the dependencies are captured by this Markov blanket. So far, so good. The problem, I would argue, came out when, well, initially, I guess it was still fine when people said, well, we're going to use that in machine learning. There was a big wave of Bayesian methods in machine learning in the 90s and the first part of the 2000s. That was all great. I mean, we can do this amazing stuff. At the same time, some people came out with the idea of predictive coding, Bayesian brain, inference machines that actually describe how the brain works. These two things came out in parallel. I want to stress that. They actually, well, say the applications in machine learning and the stuff in neuroscience came out independently as far as I can tell. Then, the issue came where we said, okay, how about combining these things? So we're going to take this concept from statistics that works really well in machine learning, and that allows us to do inference in a very cheap way, because we only need to consider a subset of all of the variables involved. How about we use that to model the brain? And we say, well, the brain now is doing inference on the environment, and this set of variables, this Markov blanket, is the body. So that was the intuition. Is that a good intuition? Well, this is a slide that I updated this morning. It's very dense, and for a particular reason. Well, these are actual claims being made in the literature, some of them stronger than others, some of them are just innocent citations, perhaps, that, these Markov blankets, which are just a statistical property, these Markov blankets, apparently, they can be used to help us understand life, mind, self, sex and gender, pain experience, religious practices, natural languages, psychotherapy, sustainability, climate and ecosystems, so on and so forth. I swear you're going to find a paper at least for each one of these topics. So, if true, this is amazing. We can go from, explaining experiences of pain to understanding the secrets behind life, to design of architectural, of architecture in general. Amazing. If we can all do that with this, that's cool. Well, now I'm going to focus on, say, the first claim being made there. So Markov blankets for life. This comes out in a paper, 2013, Carl Friston mentioning, oh, I can use this thing to define what it means for a system to be living. When am I going to see that a system is living? How am I going to detect a living system given some arbitrary pool, say, of particles of, things that I'm looking at? Since 2013, many claims have been made. Some of them here, more of them probably not even mentioned here. And they are all, based on apparently rather innocent assumption. So the fact that so far, what I showed you in my definition of Markov blankets is just a bunch of random variables, and then one or a set of random variables that are the Markov blanket for something else. This is a definition given by PER, so I'm calling that PER blanket. Then these people of free energy principle, working on the free energy principle, they tell me, or they tell us, well, that's a nice definition and it works pretty well for random variables, but there's no time involved in there. We are interested in looking at stochastic processes, so we want to see, a bunch of random variables and their evolution over time. And we want to be able to have, say, something like that blanket definition that works for, dynamical systems, for stochastic processes. So that's what they say. It is just an innocent way to generalize this concept and go all the way to dynamical systems, where we can talk about more interesting things from the perspective of biology and neuroscience. In practice, we, and here I say, we, me, and the other authors agreed that actually what they say is a bit different. So instead of having a single axis as in there, so say processes without time, processes with time, I will be introducing a couple of other dimensions here, and then I'm going to unpack what I mean in these 3 different dimensions. With or within a model is the title of the talk, so I won't be spoiling too much now. And epistemic metaphysical, which is something that I will talk about towards the end. We think that, what they did is actually somewhere down here, like in this 3-dimensional plot, rather than just an innocent mathematical generalization. And that's why, the fact that there is such a huge difference between these 2 things, that's why, we were brought to write a paper and say, okay, we need some clarity. Okay, so first I'm going to have something a bit, probably this is the slightly more technical part, if at all, in this presentation. So as I mentioned, defining Markov blankets for random variables is pretty easy because we can do that visually. We can just draw a Bayesian network, and then we can just find and circle, change color, change the color of nodes that will be the Markov blanket of a specific node that we are interested in. Now, if we have some arbitrary stochastic process, which I'm trying to exemplify on the right-hand side, we have all sorts of different, maps between these variables, and all of these variables are evolving over time. So the small subscripts there are just trying to, address the idea that there's time involved in this case. Well, now, what are we really trying to isolate? So on the left, it's pretty easy. I tell you, I want to know something about Y. Can you find me the Markov blanket of Y? On the right-hand side, well, if it's Y, do you mean Y at a specific point in time? Or do you mean Y as a whole? And if you mean Y as a whole, what do we do with all of this changing, arrows in there? Like, sometimes they are dependent, say, for a bit, sometimes they are not. And if we look at a single one, why do we choose a single one? What makes you choose Y2 instead of Y1? There's a lot more, I guess, to unpack. I think that's the point I'm trying to make.
Just clarify.
Please.
If it is about POMDP, why there's no arrow from Y3 to Y4? What's the U1, V2?
So this is, here I'm assuming some non-homogeneous, slightly more general thing. So all of the maps are actually changing, for example, at each time step. I think in standard POMDPs, people just assume homogeneous processes, stochastic.
Y3 and Y4 is completely uncorrelated, same thing, it's not arrow.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so yeah, these like particular arrows are not a mistake. Like, I drew them on purpose, like to be messy. And the point is to highlight that it's not always easy to, even ask the right question. Cool. So about this, there's some stuff by a few French colleagues of mine, or, we can talk about this at the end. Azure blankets, here I'm trying to, give us a short overview of some of the different, definitions that have been used and where they differ at a very fundamental level. And this should also partially justify the fact that we chose to use per blankets to call the original formulation for, random variables by Judah Pearl, and Friston blankets, so this construct that is supposed to be solving all of these different problems. Very dense. I'm not expecting a lot of, say, attention paid to this right now, but I'm leaving this because it will be in the recording, instead because you might want to take a look at it later. Markov blankets, say per blankets, say the first definition, first line, that's the original definition. They were for, random variables, no time involved, pretty cool. This group, so Martin Beal and co-authors, they highlighted that Friston tried to use this in one of their definitions for steady states distributions, and then they were actually drawing different conclusions. So yeah, there was something a bit fishy there. Then they changed the definition. Okay, now we're going to have something a bit different, and this was within a Markov chain. Oh no, the second one was just, yeah, definition that you can have pretty innocent definition of, yeah, Markovianity on some Markov chain. The third one is the one that I'm mentioning. So that I was mentioning. So Beal actually bringing out the fact that there was something a bit weird. And then we have a bunch of attempts by Friston and colleagues that seem to be changing, like in every paper. Then we have a few different solutions that have been proposed to actually solve all of their issues, but for some reason they don't like them. Perhaps they are not complete, but they don't seem to be considering them. So they remain, say, an option, but not an option that is currently, say, within this free energy principle framework. Again, I don't want to spend too much time on the details. We can talk about them at the end if you're interested. I'm just saying the fact that they try to suggest that there's an innocent transition between, say, atemporal models and temporal models, it is by far not true. It is by far not true. Just on the technical side. Now, the main, so the title of this talk, inference with or within a model. So if we consider, like, the standard problem of inference, across different fields, like, you could pick your favorite field and the problem will still be the same, please.
When you speak about random dynamical system, you're speaking about a stochastic differential equation,
yeah,
with Gaussian noise,
yeah,
with the, okay.
Yeah, sorry, yeah. I mean, at least that's the setup that they are using.
That's the setup that they're using.
Yeah, they are starting with some some system in Langevin form, and then they are going from there.
And essentially the idea is that when you're at stationarity, then you can partition the tangent space into some directions that have partition the tangent space into internal direction,
yeah,
black direction, external direction.
Yeah. Exactly. And then say that's an interesting problem, but for sure, say it doesn't solve a lot of open questions, for example, in biology, where you want to study, say, systems that are also, that don't show steady states at all, or perhaps that have very interesting behaviors away from steady states. So what they try to imply, and to me, they are not showing, and what they try to do, which I think is very interesting, is to say, well, if we can have this partition at steady state, can we actually pull back this partition away from steady state?
Okay. Sometimes they want to construct what in dynamical system theory is kind of stable and unstable manifolds. So
yeah,
you bring back, okay.
They are trying, yeah. Yeah, thanks for the question. Of course, if you have questions, feel free to just raise your hand at any point, yeah? This is, supposed to be a seminar, quite interactive if possible. So inference with or within a model, as I said, this is a caricature of, the problem of inference across fields. What does it mean to do inference? Well, we have a system that we want to know something about, to do inference about. And here, this is exemplified by a brain. We have somebody who is trying to do inference about that particular system. And this is, the crazy scientist over there. And then we have a model that that the scientist is using to do inference about the system that they want to do inference about. So 3 different things: scientist, model, system to do inference on. What are Pearl blankets? Well, they are some statistical property of a model. So they are somewhere in there. And they are used by a modeler to say something about the system they're interested in. So they say, well, I'm only interested in this particular area of the brain. I'm just going to look at the surrounding ones, assuming that all of the other ones, for some reason, are not directly influencing it. And so I'm going to be able to say something about the brain. That will be, say, a very generic claim that people might want to make. Okay, now what is Friston trying to say? Friston and colleagues, people trying to apply this free energy principle across different fields. Well, they're trying to say that the inference now is happening inside the model itself. What do I mean by that? I mean that the scientist is not part of the picture. That's what they are trying to say. The scientist disappears. There's no one doing inference now, if not something that lives inside this model. That's why they need this kind of partition. They're trying to tell me that when they partition the system into, say, internal, blanket, external, the internal will be doing inference about the external. This is their claim. Okay, so this is a big difference. Now the scientists disappear. Now the inference is happening within this thing. I'm, leaving a bunch of questions marked there because, well, it's not clear what they are saying about the relation between the model and the system they originally wanted to do inference about. Perhaps a brain, perhaps some, bacterium or some protocell in some chemical soup. It is not clear if they are telling me that the model is all they are interested in, so they are also going to remove the brain or the system they want to do inference about, and they are just going to have some mathematical theory, or if they want to ground this into, physical study of a system, some maybe chemical soup that they can model very, very precisely, and make where they can make claims that actually have some meaning also for the field where they should be applied. Yeah, so this is something I will come back to. Now, as I mentioned earlier, what I call system at times, agent at other times, they call thing. Well, it doesn't really matter, what word we use right now. I mean, they all have slightly different, perhaps interpretations, but yeah, this is something we can discuss later if need be. The point is, I'm calling them agents for a particular reason, I guess, because not only do they come around saying, well, if you give me a bunch of variables, I'm going to be able to partition them internal, external, boundary, blanket, so the figure in the middle. On top of that, they say, I'm going to, apply some interpretation to that. And, I'm going to come up with a rule where I say that all of the variables that are directly influenced by the variable I'm interested in, so this mu in this case, all of the variables directly influenced by mu and the coparents of mu, so this A here is a coparent, is not directly influenced by mu, but it's actually affecting a variable that is affected by mu. So these variables will be active variables. They will be like the actuators of a system. All of the other ones, part of the blanket that are not active, that are not actuators, will be sensors. There will be sensory variables. This is what they say. This is an extra step again, like this doesn't come for free. Moving from 2 to 3, yeah, you can come up with a rule, but the fact that you're now calling this, sensor, and now you're calling this actuator, it is not something that comes for free. As I was mentioning, that mu is the thing when these people talk about things. This is just a standard, diagram that you might have seen if you're familiar with this literature. I just wanted to report this as a way like to perhaps understand the previous slide, because we're using the same color scheme. So if you look at the previous slide, external, actuators, sensors, internal, basically the same thing that I have in a diagrammatic form over here. Okay. Oops, is it working? Yeah. Now probably to the, well, this was the third dimension that I was mentioning, and perhaps like the most troublesome to some of us, the fact that, we moved, and this is something I was mentioning earlier with the question marks. We moved to a situation where the scientist disappears. We are saying that something is happening inside this model. Now, the question is whether we think that this model is a closed representation of the world, and for some reason, things that happen within this model actually have something to do with what happens in the real world. Or if we say, yeah, I don't care about that, I will just model something inside this thing, and I will just drop every possible claim about, physical reality or any sort of other universe with a different, set of physical laws. So the question is, do these blankets actually exist also outside this model or not? And as I see, like some people, questioning like even the very point of me asking this question, these are some quotes that we just found in the literature where for some reason these Markov blankets became properties of the physical world. For some reason, these Markov blankets became things that define boundaries in the physical world. So some people going around telling me that the cell membrane, is defined by a Markov blanket. I don't know what that means. I have no idea what that means. I know what a cell membrane is. I don't know why you're trying to say that your model, for some reason, defines something in the physical reality. So we've been accused to say that, yeah, we think that these free energy people are going around saying that the universe is a huge Bayesian network. And that's not what we mean, really. All we mean is that, you can make, claims about the, say, universe where your model is kind of defined, but, when you're trying to connect some of these different universes, well, things are not as clear cut. So this is an example that I really like from the game of life, cellular automata. We can do things inside this cellular automaton. We can study very cool stuff inside this cellular automaton. We can do, statistical mechanics inside the cellular automaton. We can understand how individuals might actually emerge in this cellular automaton. But, then we are not going to say that this is a good model of our physical reality. Because, well, for example, this game of life instantiation has a completely different set of physical laws. It's a grid. The way that these grids are actually these grid cells are turned on and off is very different from our understanding of our reality, and so we can make claims about this universe that can have no particular relation to our universe. That's fine, but if we want to make a connection, well, we better have a good motivation to make that connection.
I don't understand, because it seems to me that because the set of possible mathematical models is huge.
Yes.
So they're saying in some sense that all the possible Markov blankets that appear in all the possible mathematical models are realizable in our universe. Is this what you're saying?
So
What they are saying?
Very good point. So I think some people are. I would say some people are. I don't agree. I found this completely absurd, but I think some people are thinking that.
Because mathematical models, they have the cardinality of continuum.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure that there has some ways to, probably cut it down to some, I don't know, they might want to look at, finite dimensional models. They might want to look at, models, say, if we choose, for example, if they only consider, I think they've done so far, models that use, for example, Gaussian noise, while you're cutting down on a lot of, possible probability distributions, you're only considering Gaussian probability distributions. It's still larger than what's realizable in the physical world, but I guess that they will probably find some cuts, some arbitrary assumptions to cut it down. But it's anyway, when you ask it that way, it sounds even more amazing. I don't want to say the words that come to mind really, but it sounds, even crazier. Yeah.
I'm a bit confused this aspect of model within model within the system and ontology epistemology axis. Is it actually independent? It just sounds.
I think so. So you can say, oops.
Like when you are going to within a model, it sounds like already taking ontological position, or not?
I think it is really like a matter of perspective at that point. Like, you know, if you want to say, so I would argue that probably when people talk about ontological, they talk about ontological about our physical reality, not the physical reality of, you know, game of life. So they will say, okay, if this model is about our physical reality, then it's an ontology. Or at least, you know, it's an ontology with our physical reality. But if we look, say, at a different perspective, I don't know, I would argue if you just stick to the game of life and you tell me everything about the game of life, well, then you might be ontological with respect to the game of life. I don't know.
Okay.
I hate to sound like I'm defending the free energy principle, but this metaphysical epistemic distinction, I mean, it kind of has to do with what we mean by the probability distribution. And like in physics, people often think of the probability distribution like the steady state as something you could measure. You know, over time, there's fluctuations due to the environment. You put something under your microscope and you can measure it, and you can measure the distribution over time, usually, or maybe over many runs, but if it's steady state over time, and then you can say like, this distribution satisfies this conditional independence assumption, right? I mean, that's an objective property of the distribution being sampled.
Yeah, so I don't know, I mean, there's like a classical example. You can set this up like with 3 harmonic oscillators, like 3 springs, and you can say, well, one is the Markov blanket for the other 2. I mean, yes, you can do that. I
meant in terms of these quotes you put up as kind of being, you seem to say like these don't really make sense, that the cell sets up, that the membrane is a Markov blanket of the cell. Like, I guess I don't really understand why that's patently nonsensical, because that seems to be a claim about the steady state.
So I think there are a few, you know, I think if we were to take that route, I think there will be other questions that need to be answered. So say like the cell membrane, you know, it is not a static.
Right.
It is not formed of like the same proteins over time, right? So the fact that we can have like, you know, parts of the cell membrane just, you know, being cut and then, you know, being repaired, or, you know, slowly dying out and then, you know, being replaced. The fact that, you know, the membrane stays the same. Well, the concept of membrane stays the same, but, you know, the underlying parts are actually just changing, you know, brings me to ask, okay, where is the map there? Like, you know, they have to provide me with the map. Like if they had a good way like to exactly do what you say, so if they could connect precisely to measurements in the physical world, amazing. I haven't seen that. Like so far, they just bring me some simulations where they say, well, in this simulation, we have these things that never die, they never do this, they never do that. And then of course you have a good interpretation there. I'm sure you have one. Not always. I don't find that always trivial. I think it is a possibility, but it is not trivial.
Okay.
Yeah, cool. I mean, I'm almost done anyway. Okay, let me go back. Oops, it's a bit slower than I thought. Yeah, the game of, oh yeah. Okay, I guess like, you know, more or less like the summary of the main part. Why did we decide to call these 2 things with, you know, different names? Well, for one, you know, one is about random variables, one is about stochastic processes. No time, sure, that works. then, we have the fact that, per blankets usually are just, part of a model that I'm using to study a system. Don't care so much what this Markov blanket actually maps to in the real world. For Friston blankets, they want to tell me, well, this is the cell membrane. This is the body. This is this particular part of the blockchain that does something. Okay. Not sure if blockchain is the best example of metaphysical. Let's say, I don't know, something else. Then they say, to understand what a Markov blanket is, the assumption is always that I need to say what variable I'm interested in, and then I can tell you what the Markov blanket of that variable is. These free energy people, remember the very first thing I said, they are trying to say that given a system, they will give you a way to partition the system. Yeah. So it's, they're trying to go the other way around. In saying statistics, I need to give you the system, you find me something. They are saying, no, you give me the whole thing and I will give you the partition. That's what they claim. In the former case, we have a scientist. In the latter, it just disappears. Yeah. Now, I want to bring your attention probably, I guess, to the last problem I can focus on, at least for a minute or two. If you remember when I presented this slide earlier, I said, look, there's a bunch of variables. And then, I tried to, smoothly move on because I wanted to leave this for a discussion, that was about to come out in a few minutes. I tried to smoothly move on to the fact that somehow now we have a variable mu, which is the thing that we are interested in. And then this thing has a blanket and this thing has an environment, or so they say. The point is that I didn't tell you how I chose this mu. Yeah. And I didn't tell you because, well, basically they don't tell me how to do that. I mean, they say they do, but they don't actually do that. We still need to assume basically the variable of interest. So they're not giving me the partition. I need to give them the partition and then they can tell me something. Now, if that sounds weird, well, that should sound weird. And of course, we are not the only ones who notice that. Katsunori and Keisuke, both here now, they actually asked, I think, the very, very, the precise question behind what I'm about to say, who's actually tailoring this blanket? Who's actually deciding what the blanket is for? Like, what's the variable that we chose or the set of variables that we choose to isolate in order to define a blanket? Well, people in statistics and machine learning are honestly just telling you, yeah, I'm choosing that. Now, these free energy people, they are not, but the point is that they are still choosing that. I mean, in a bunch of papers, you can literally just go and find, oh, we chose the 8 variables that blah, blah, something. Or in another one, oh, we chose the 15 variables that blah, blah, something. And the point is that this criterion is not part of their framework. It's not part of their theory. It's not part of their principle. This is a choice made a priori. It might be a very good choice, but it has nothing to do with this theory. So the interesting part, so the part where they tell me I'm going to be able to give you a partition, they had to do before, and then they try and tell me something. Well, this is a very different claim from the one you are making, you as in free energy authors. And this is where, I would like to, pause for a second. This is very important. This to me makes the entire framework much less interesting, much more quickly, because, the whole point of me trying to follow this framework was to say, oh, you're going to be able to tell me how to partition a system? Amazing. But if now I have to do it by myself anyway, I don't know. I might as well use any of the other proposals out there. I don't know, sorry. I thought I saw a reflex with the mirror. Cool. There are other problems that will not be covering anyway, that's fine. In our reply, I mean, we try to be generous and we try to be, you know, inclusive, and we try to give, I guess, a way out, a bunch of ways out to, you know, either solve some of these issues or, you know, invite people to be a bit clearer about their claims, or, you know, actually providing possible solutions. So these are the three axes that I had. You know, we could just ask them to be more clear, and we could just ask them, okay, can you actually tell us what your claims are? And whether you have some commitments to some particular assumptions, to some particular, you know, ideas. It would be just nice to see them. You know, that's the easy way out. The question that Artemi was asking at the very beginning, you know, do we have a way to deal with non-stationary systems? Well, you know, I'm not sure. You know, not at least in the way they are formulating this framework. So, you know, I kind of answered this question already, but, you know, it's quite nice that you kind of anticipated my, you know, one of my last slides at the very beginning. It is not clear that you can do much of the work that they claim they can do without this stationarity. And, you know, this stationarity is a bit of a strong assumption for biological systems, because a lot of the behavior, as I mentioned before, that is interesting in biological systems happens when they are not stationary. So if I want to study growth, if I want to study reproduction, if I want to study, you know, a lot of interesting things in biological systems, stationarity is usually not probably the assumption I would start with. Yeah, so maybe we don't need an FEP. I'm not sure. FEP stands for free energy principle by now. I guess that's probably clear. The story that I said at the very beginning, so we can have reinforcement learning, a reinforcement learning like story without without this sort of first principles approach. I think that's still true. We can do reinforcement learning, and maybe it will work in robotics. And maybe that will work. You know, in robotics, maybe we could build better robots. That's amazing. But we can just drop perhaps like the whole first principle story. I think that would still be a viable option. Yeah, so, you know, different versions, active inference and, you know, herd blankets, free energy principle, but with something else, etc., etc. And this is basically part of the things I'm working on. I mean, well, these are some colleagues. They actually have some reformulation, I guess, behind this free energy principle in quite general Markov categories. Pretty sure there are Markov categories, yeah. And this is some stuff that I have over here on the left, where I'm using, you know, double categories of open dynamical systems to try and formulate something that actually does maybe what the free energy principle promised, but on a more general class of systems. But yeah, that's work in progress. It's probably going to change quite a bit by the time it's published, if it ever gets published, because, well, I'm hoping it works. Yeah, that was me. Thank you.
Thank you, Manuel. Any question or comment? I think if for people sitting behind.
Thanks. I have a question about this notion of inference within models. And so I took it that you're saying that so when a scientist identifies a blanket in a set of certain variables, so they can draw a distinction between internal states and external states. And I think one thing you're claiming is that but this distinction between the internal and the external state by no means implies that the internal state is making an inference about an external state. And okay, when it comes to like brains, people tend to think that the internal state is actually making inference about the external state. And was the claim that so this latter doesn't follow from the former? Is that the claim? But it also seems to me, one thing is that it seems, although the latter doesn't follow from the former, they're not incompatible. And someone might say that. One question is, would you agree with that? And another question is, so many people think that the brain makes an inference about the external state. And when you problematize this notion of inference within the model, are you challenging that claim in general, or is that a different issue?
Yeah, so let me try and bring all of this together. So the problematization, I guess, that I'm trying to stress here, that I'm trying to bring out here, is with the fact that, you know, the scientist disappears. So I would say that's the issue. Like the with or within is like, you know, well, I could have a model on my laptop and I could try and make some inferences about, you know, the system I'm interested in, could be a brain, using the laptop that contains some kind of model. Now, what they are saying, you know, at least when they try to tell me that they can explain life, mind, whatever, you know, now they are saying that the inference happens, like, you know, there's an entity inside the model that is doing inference. It's not me doing inference with the model. There's an entity inside the model that is doing inference. Does that make sense?
So the notion of Friston blanket implies that. Is it?
Yes.
So the notion of Friston blanket implies that. So, and you're saying that that's a claim about inference within the model.
Yes, because now they are, I mean, somebody needs to do this inference. Something needs to do the inference. In one case, it's me, and in one case, it's something inside the model.
So if you say, if Friston says that, I'm going to put it. So they might say that this notion of the Markov blankets, they like latch onto certain dynamics in the world, and so in that sense, they can model the emergence of an individual thing in terms of like Markov blankets, without necessarily saying that something's doing the inference. That seems to me a possible way to go. And or is that in any ways problematic? I'm not sure. Another way to put it is, I'm not sure why they need to say that there's inference going on.
I'm not sure either, but that's why the problem is that they are saying that.
So it might be it seems to me that there might be a more charitable interpretation, saying that there's a certain dynamics going on which you can model by using Bayesian inferences.
No,
and
they are saying, no, this thing is doing inference about this other thing. Like internal states are doing inference about external states. Like that's their lemma.
Okay. All right, that's good then. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, so that's where, I mean, I'm with you, like on the entire front, like literally the entire. The problem, you know, comes out when they say explicitly, you know, well, I mean, maybe it is just a matter of
I see.
rewriting the statement, but yeah, then I'm not really sure what the statement is anymore.
I see. Thank you.
Because in a way, like it feels like that's the whole point that they are trying to make.
All right.
I don't know if that's helpful.
No, yeah, that's helpful. Thanks.
Any other questions?
There's no question, so I think I'm gonna. So because I think I had a second question, and that was more if your criticism has a more general scope or not. So like if it applies to the Bayesian brain hypothesis in general, because that's also a way of saying that the brain is doing Bayesian inference. But one way of seeing it is to say that the brain is exhibiting a certain kind of dynamics that you can explain and predict in terms of Bayesian inference.
Yeah,
is that a similar slip or yeah?
I would say it feels much less so, because there's no claim in most works. There's no claim of, well, that's the only way things could be this way. Like, behind this free energy principle, there's like a, sort of claim, well, given, the setup, this is inevitably what's going to happen. While it feels like a lot of, Bayesian brain predictive coding something, it feels like, oh, we are measuring stuff and then we are attaching some interpretation. But it doesn't sound to me, in most cases, like anyone is claiming that that's unique and that's the only way it could ever be. It's more like a matter of utility, like it works pretty well. We think it's fine. Some people might disagree, and I think that's compatible. It feels, more about utility. Like, this seems like a good model feeling to me.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions? I have one clarification. Right? So you didn't frame this within the model. Sorry, inference within the model is problematic. Or okay, so if the boundary is defined anyway, it doesn't matter observer or system itself. If the boundary is like solid, is it any problem like inside it, starting for external one, or is it?
Yeah, I don't think personally, I don't have a huge problem with just saying, well, we might have things that do inference inside a system. Honestly, that sounds amazing. I don't know if it's true, but it sounds amazing. Like, it sounds very interesting. I don't know. It feels like, there might be something going on. So that's probably not true, or it's only true under very strict assumptions. But, I think as long as you stay within that, it's not a joke, but yeah, if you stay within a model, that's fine. The problem is, I don't know. The problem is when you're trying to bring out that this solves, climate and something, whatever, like, yeah, I mean, it's a bit unclear there. If you tell me, I don't know, this part of, the atmosphere is a Markov blanket for this other, what do you mean? Like, yeah, when it comes out of the model, that's when, you need to be careful, I guess.
Thanks. Any other? Any comments?
Yeah, I want to relate Friston blanket with, definition of autopoiesis or something, organization closure or operational closure, the kind of closure. So it's different from statistical conditional independence by Friston. But so for me, one future possibility is replace, Friston's blanket with something like operational closure or something. I'm not sure it's not possible, but then question arises whether organization closure is statistical or what exactly is. That makes me confused now.
I think, yeah, it would be cool to replace it, like replace this whole, strange assumption, whatever, with something that does more interesting work. I don't know. I kind of like the example of, say, the cognitive domain, like in the game of life. So, trying to define all of the sets. Well, what is it now? A microscopic set of perturbations, and basically how they can be coarse-grained into macro sets of perturbations that apply to the game of life, to some, say, shapes in the game of life, and then, start studying, okay, how do these affect like this? I feel it is not easy, I guess, to do with a biological system in the same, with the same level of precision that you can do it, say, in a 2D grid world. But it sounds pretty cool, to be honest. Like if I could do the same kind of study that Beer did, like on gliders in real life, that would be amazing. And I think that could be, say, a good way to, maybe study the actual, things surrounding a system of interest and the environment.
Yeah.
オンラインの方で何か質問があれば。あるいは会社の方でも。A bit early, but yeah, let's finish the meeting. Thank you again, Manuel.
Thank you.